Pushing the limits of Victoria 3 is probably my favorite thing to do with it. Sure, I enjoy a creative run with a minor power or a tough, unrecognized start, among others, but what if I want the greatest graph that ever graphed? For that, I need to do a Super Germany run. For those that don't know, Super Germany refers to forming Germany with both Prussia and Austria's full borders, meaning that you have Germany alongside Hungary, Galicia, Transylvania, Northern Italy, and so on. It's the most powerful great power by a large margin if you can pull it off, and in the most recent patch 1.7.3, it's actually easier than ever to do. In this guide, you'll learn the new meta for forming Super Germany and how to run the economy that is so large that its only bottleneck is your willingness to run the game through all the late game lag. The 1.7 patch has improved performance, but spoiler alert, once I hit 10,000 construction points, the game really wasn't running much at all anymore. Let's get into it. There is a section later in this video where I complain about an inability to use my entire investment pool. This has been directly patched in patch 1.7.4. Just wanted to quickly add that in as a note so that it doesn't look like I'm spreading misinformation. Okay, let's continue with the guide. With 1.7.3, the diplomatic situation for Prussia, Austria, and Russia has become a lot friendlier, at least until questions about German unification come to mind. For this strategy, your goal is to keep Russia and Austria happy, so don't rival them, and instead begin improving relations. I recommend rivaling France for the historical roleplay, of course, and the Ottomans because they're mostly irrelevant and are free influence. In terms of early game building, I'd go with pretty standard coal and iron opening. Prussia has 45 construction points at the start of the game, which is a good start, and beginning with coal and iron will keep your construction costs down. The next important step is to put your interest down in Indochina and South China to try and jump into whatever wars Britain starts the game with. They usually go for Hong Kong almost immediately, but 1.7.3 they sometimes outright conquer Siam or Burma. In my game, they went for Burma. Your goal is to try and get a bankroll off them if you can, but it's not always possible. If they attack Qing to start, grab a war operation war goal on Qing, as it's about as good as a British bankroll, but the bankroll harms a competing great power while aiding you, whereas Qing's war operations will just push them to their inevitable bankruptcy a little faster. In my game's case, France supported Burma, and seeing an opportunity, I asked for a war goal to humiliate France. This will be useful later when we go for Schleswig-Holstein, since France often likes to get involved, and in general, keeping France off you for a few years is nice. Beating France as Prussia on game start isn't super easy, but the French army will be busy in Burma, and you have Britain to back you up, so you should win. Unfortunately, every game is different, but it's pretty consistent they'll be able to side with Britain in some conflict on game start. If you do that, then they can't join against you in another play. In my game, I got lucky and also humiliated France, which meant Denmark was basically a free war. In most cases, either Britain or France will join Denmark's side, and if they do, it significantly slows down the Schleswig-Holstein war. If no one joins Denmark's side, they'll almost always capitulate, and I chose to do something interesting here. I made Denmark a protectorate so I could get control of them and their German subjects with one war goal. They'd be much less likely to back down if I had a ton of primary war goals on them. The only weird thing about this is that until we make Denmark a puppet to get control of Schleswig and Holstein, we won't actually complete the journal entry. The truth is, we were in no rush to complete the journal, so it's fine. Instead, we'll focus on preparations for our war with Austria. That might sound strange given that we're improving relations with them and therefore can't go to war with them, but there's an important caveat there. I'm going to skip ahead my playthrough a couple years, but before I do, I'll let you know that I took construction for the Zollverein, since building better is really good in the early game but falls off later on, and I built up a small navy just so I could have something in case I need to naval invade anywhere. You don't have to do this, since this strategy doesn't need any naval invasions, but you know, it's nice to have. I turned on corn laws to get a market liberal, and yeah, the corn law method is so well known that I won't go over it. I did this because Prussia is rich enough that laissez-faire makes sense for them, but you could definitely stick with interventionism and be fine too. As a rule of thumb, laissez-faire is best for growing the economy and therefore is the best economic law in general, but in specialized cases, interventionism can be better when you need to direct the economy more, such as with the Sikh Empire, which needs to get its iron, coal, and wood industries up fast to keep up. By the way, I did the corn law strat, but my modern conservative died before I could pass laissez-faire anyway, so I effectively did a no corn law strat by coincidence, which goes to show that you don't need to do it. In 1841, I got Denmark's autonomy to Dominion status, which doesn't give me their personal unions yet. They have to become a puppet for the personal unions to go to me. In my run, I was improving relations with and trying to leverage guys like Hanover into my block, but to be honest, I didn't need to do this. I think I was just doing it to pass the time while my economy got built up and while waiting for the German minor nations to research nationalism so I could begin the leadership candidate war. I passed landed voting a year later, which will help my industrialists and intelligentsia come to power, whose law choices I generally prefer. Again, most of this stuff is external to the Super Germany strategy, but I like to get my liberalization going right away in most games. I was even getting colonial institutions going, despite having no interest in colonizing for at least a decade or more. In 1843, the German National Identity Journal finally happened, meaning the leadership play against Austria is available now, and this is where that caveat I mentioned before comes up. Normally, you can't attack nations with whom you have cordial relations or better, but the launch leadership play button works through relations, so although I'm not going to be declaring the war right away, I at least know that I can declare it when I want to. I wanted to wait until I was confident Russia wouldn't join the war against me, since Austria alone is already a tough enemy, but Austria with Russia is almost unbeatable for poor Prussia right now. In 1845, I made my move, as it looked like Russia wasn't feeling like joining, and in my head, if they did, I could just restart the run, as I was only 40 minutes in and I was tired of waiting. Against just Austria, if you have Bavaria on your side, you have one long front line you can pile your whole army onto, so I did that and marked Vienna as strategic goal. Small detail here, you're going to absolutely need Austrian reparations to the next step of this strategy, so add that and don't dismantle Austria, obviously, since we'll be forming Super Germany with them. Assuming Russia doesn't join, you can pretty easily beat Austria by just piling up all your men, and with the support of the other Germans, you win with sheer numbers. The war was over in 1846, and now we have to reconcile with Austria as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Austria is pretty bitter about the whole thing, so they really don't want to. You'll have to bankroll them up to amicable, so their rivalry which they've presumably set is invalidated. You'll basically just be repaying the reparations to Austria as a bankroll to fix relations. In optimal runs, you'll get an obligation out of this by the time relations hit 50, so you can absolve the obligation to jump to 80, but we'll get there later. At this point, we can, in theory, form the North German Federation, but I had only just gotten Schleswig and Holstein as personal unions. I had an idea though. I can't integrate them for a while, but what if I just give them independence? Would that count as having liberated them? I saved first and then tried it, and yes, that does work, but I didn't think to do it until 1851, so I missed a couple years of controlling the whole federation. Again, it's not a big deal really in the long run. I also passed homesteading that year to help weaken the Junkers, which in my opinion is worth doing, but I only got it because of a lucky political movement, so it's not part of the strategy. Anyway, once you become the North German Federation, you're already pretty strong. I was lucky enough to, a few years ago on the run, get an obligation, so I absolved it with Austria, putting our relations to 80. With Austria at friendly relations, they will support the unification of Germany, and weirdly, you don't need pan-nationalism to form Germany anymore. I'm not actually sure why, but obviously I'm happy to see it. I didn't see that Württemberg didn't want to unify, so I did form Super Germany, except that tiny state in the middle of South Germany, but that's fine, since I got a claim on them, and on Alsace-Lorraine. Now that you've formed Germany, you're already basically unstoppable. Your economy is about as big as India's, and you have a gigantic modern army. To reiterate the Super Germany guide, the basic steps are to attack Denmark while you're on Britain's side in a war so you can free the Germans there, improve relations with Austria while waiting for the opportunity to start the Germany leadership war, start the war when you're confident that Russia won't join against you, then bankroll Austria to 80 relations while enjoying your power as the North German Federation, or in my case, sitting around waiting to free Schleswig and Holstein. You're bottlenecked by Austria's relations anyway, so it's not a big deal if you're slow on forming the North German Federation. I got Super Germany in 1851. How fast can you get it? My goal for the rest of this video is to just GDP max and enjoy the game, and I can tell you, having finished the run up around 1925 or so, you can reach some insane heights as Super Germany. Although Super Germany is itself a beautiful empire, it's pretty clear that Germany has greater aspirations than to just rule its natural borders. Of course, the natural borders still aren't quite in place, as Alsace-Lorraine is still in French hands. It's time to test out the combined Austro-German army, and it is indeed immense in size. I've got over 300 battalions, and it makes most sense to cripple France right away. I'm going to take my claims, take their money, and free Occitania. Most of the French power is in the north, but the south is important to them too, so being able to free the Occitans is greatly crippling. Belgium also joined the war, so I added Wallonia as a war goal since I've got a claim to it. At first I didn't get why I had a claim to Wallonia, but then I remembered that Luxembourg is in Wallonia, and the German Empire gets claims to Luxembourg and therefore the rest of Wallonia. Anyway, the army easily marched into Alsace-Lorraine, but I'd need to reach Paris to capitulate France, so to help with that, I went for a naval invasion in Normandy, if only because it drags men off the front. Whether the landing succeeds or not, the front is now much lighter. Putting down naval invasions is akin to opening extra fronts, and that's what makes them so effective. As we do this war, I'm also building up more industries, but to be clear, I don't have some grand overarching strategy for my industry. I'm basically just checking what's profitable and building more of it. I add construction sectors when my budget is positive, and I concentrate my industry in places with a lot of peasants like Bohemia and Hungary. In 1853, my standard of living is at 9.9, but you'll see as time goes on that the SOL will rise quickly, and that's thanks to all the new jobs coming up. In terms of what to prioritize, industries like steel, iron, coal, and other construction goods will increase your GDP faster, since they'll make it easier to get more construction for your private sector. But if you want more standard of living, you'll want more farms, wine, clothes, and furniture. I personally prioritize the GDP first, since the rising tide of GDP raises all standard of living boats in many ways. After defeating France in July of 1853, I went after Württemberg, of course, since their existence was a joke. You're going to notice I'm taking on a lot of debt, and this is intentional. If you saw my sick empire run, you'd have noticed that I encouraged you to maintain a positive balance, but in this run, as Germany, we don't need a positive balance. Our army is already massive, and we have no existential threats. We also pay almost no interest, and once I get to laissez-faire, we pay basically none at all. It is advantageous to go into debt to speed up our construction if interest is low enough. Victoria 3 is a game of limited resources, and one of those resources is time. We only have 100 years, so going into debt to get the edge over our enemies is worthwhile. Of course, that would be more pertinent if the AI weren't so mediocre at the game. At the end of the day, I could probably stay below 250 construction points and still destroy the AI with ease, but I want to push my GDP, so I'll play well. Let's talk about taxes next. In general, taxes are bad for your country because they depress consumption. When pops consume less, they buy less, which reduces profits. When profits are lower, capitalists have less money to invest. Therefore, it's not just that by adding taxes you're extracting wealth from pops who need it, you're also actively destroying potential money. Obviously, some taxes are needed for basic functions, but if a higher GDP and SOL is in your interest, then lower taxes are best. I had 100 million GDP in 1855, and it was basically all just iron and coal mines for construction. My debt is accruing, but in good time, the increased GDP and wages from the jobs generated by industries making that GDP will bring the balance back. I've also got standard of living up to 10.7, and given we have 75 million pops, our standard of living is hard to push up. The more pops you have, the more jobs you need to provide, and therefore the more slowly standard of living will change in general. To commemorate this GDP milestone, I formed the Holy Roman Empire, and this is because the Central Europe formable has a ton of primary cultures. Ultimately, all of these don't really change our accepted pops if we're on racial segregation, but more primary cultures means we can in theory reduce our cultural acceptance laws without harming our nation as much. In 1856, the start of a proper German empire began, as Egypt found itself at war with the Ottomans, and I offered them a deal with the devil. Reverse swaying is as strong as ever, so I got all of Egypt as a free protectorate, and all I have to do is beat up the Ottomans, who are a Russian protectorate somehow, by the way. At first, the war was slow going because I refused to micromanage my armies, but I got a naval invasion in Thrace in April of 1857, and with that, the war was basically over. The Ottomans just couldn't cover all the fronts. Ethiopia had joined the war looking to grab Eritrea, but my smart Egyptian subject added a war goal to the Ethiopian, which is great because that means they take the infamy and I get free land for my subject. After the war ended, I started my move to laissez-faire, which was going to be hard fought, but laissez-faire would let my economy grow the fastest, given that I now have a strong cohort of capitalists that can afford to invest in the nation. You can see, by the way, that by 1858, my budget is already catching up to an even balance, and I haven't changed my taxes or anything. This is just from the increase in taxes and minting I've gotten from my GDP and pops working. Remember when I had no debt and a £200,000 deficit? I'm almost 3/4 of the way to defaulting, but only have a £100,000 debt. Once we get into the positive, I'll let it ride for a bit to pay off the debt, and then add more construction and start the loop again. I got very lucky in 1859, as I passed laissez-faire despite the low chance to do so. In terms of company, I was deciding between the Société Jean Coqueril and the United Construction Conglomerate, both of which are very strong, but I chose the Construction Conglomerate because I wanted to test later if I could remove the construction principle from my power block and keep the company. Since I might forget to mention it later, the answer is no. If you remove the construction principle, the company goes away. Next up, to help cement the strength of my industrialists, I went to both voting, which would give a lot of power to my capitalists. I want to liberalize my economy heavily now, so getting a strong industrialist base is important. I want to mention another important thing about debt here. I'm going to jump through a couple in-game years quickly and tell you to keep an eye on the red bar of debt at the top. Notice how my balance is negative, but the bar is shrinking? This is because I'm creating businesses at a faster rate than my debt is accruing. You take credit against your own nation's buildings, so every time a building is completed, more credit becomes available. My balance is still negative, although it'll become positive pretty soon, but I could maintain this negative balance forever because my debt limit will outscale my interest payments. It's very important that you, as an aspiring Victoria 3 GIGACHAD, come to love debt building and not fear debt, except in high interest situations. It is still definitely the case that unrecognized or low-rank powers likely can't afford to maintain huge credit balances, but for the great powers, credit is a tool, not a shackle. Anyway, back to empire building. Part of building an empire often involves dismantling other empires. I declared a war to liberate the British Raj in 1863, and this is unfortunately not as useful as it would be if we did this when the Raj was still the company. When the Raj comes about, its princely states become the direct subjects of Britain, but if you liberate the Raj before then, it'll fracture all of India between the princely states. As of right now, releasing the Raj will essentially make a Super Bengal, which will be recognized. The nice thing about the EIC splitting into all its unrecognized Indian pieces is that then you can just go conquer land there like it's nothing. I took colonial administration for my power block, which although weaker than 1.7.0, is still very useful for conquering a ton of unrecognized land for very little infamy. To be honest, I didn't really want to fight Britain, so I was hoping they'd back down. To encourage them to do so, I added a ton of war goals like liberating Ireland and Scotland, which cost no infamy. The more secondary war goals against a nation, the more likely they are to back down if they feel they might lose the war. It looked like Britain wouldn't back down, but then in 1863, while I was looking over my laws, they did, meaning I didn't have to land the Kriegsmarine in London today. The next year, I expanded my construction further to almost 800 points, following the general principle of checking my budget for if I'm making too much money and reconciling that problem immediately. I also needed to make more construction to be able to make use of my investment pool. Again, point of interest that despite my negative balance, the debt bar is only shrinking thanks to the increasing debt cap from my new buildings. By the way, check out this America in 1866. I had no hand in this, but somehow the Confederates won their independence, California was free, and the Indian Territory, now Sequoia, got their freedom. I assume Mexico did most of that, maybe with the support of the Confederates, but I wasn't watching, so I have no idea. Afterwards, I joined Britain's war against Qing to grab Kenya. Special note about Kenya, it is the gateway to Central and Eastern Africa, so getting it off of Britain does two things. First, it gives you access to all of East Africa uncontested, but secondly, and more importantly, it cuts Britain off from ever getting in there. Britain would have to take Zanzibar or parts of Somalia to get in now, but the AI just doesn't tend to prioritize that land. Of course, the moment I got my Kenyan land, I just capitulated the war as no war goals were on me, and even if there were, I'd have just waited until Britain won the war on their own. By 1867, I had 12.8 standard of living, and you can see the graph growing exponentially. This is all because of the new jobs my buildings are making. I really have to stress how important making jobs is for making pops more prosperous. It's a trap to only think about reducing expenses because yes, you could plot down 200 rice farms and reduce grains price immensely, but if you just massively expand all your industries to create jobs while keeping taxes low, you'll see much better results. With 12.8 SOL, I'm number 5 in the world with 82 million pops. It's easy to be number 1 when you only have a handful of pops to employ, but hitting top 5 with 80 million pops is a pretty huge accomplishment. For my next war, I was looking for silk to start up my textiles industry, so of course I targeted Japan, looking to conquer Kansai, which has an agriculture modifier and tons of arable land. I also added a treaty port in Kanto with the hopes of getting some juicy trades with Japan, but honestly, with an empire as big as Germany, we really don't need trade at all to be powerful. I once again expanded the construction sectors in October, and once they were completed and employed up, I had 1250 construction points. Check out that GDP graph in March of 1869. Pretty flat at first as Prussia with 40 construction points, but now just exploding immensely. Anyway, I kept expanding the empire, just taking on more and more subjects when it was easy to do so, but I was making a point to keep my infamy below 25 just because I find it more fun to have that limit. If you want to go really hard as Germany, you totally can since no one can really touch you. My economy and empire were expanding so much that I actually underestimated how much construction I could afford, which is the opposite of my normal issue. I tend to overbuild construction, but yeah, I doubled my construction in 1871 to 2500 points, and now I'm losing a ton of money, but I mean, does it really matter? Well, in this case, kind of. I am losing almost £1 million per week, and that isn't sustainable no matter how fast I'm building. Nonetheless, I kept the construction going while fighting Russia. I got commercialized agriculture in 1872, and this is important because it means my capitalists can get even stronger by also controlling my agricultural industries. I hit 250 million GDP in December of 1873 while watching Qing get mangled by Russia. I got Spain as a protector in 1876 during a civil war, and this is the general strategy for obtaining infamy-free power in this world. Where there is strife and turmoil, there is civil war, and with civil wars, you can use your massive army to threaten nations to becoming your subjects. Getting more subjects, even if just protectorates, is great because it makes you generate more mandates for your power block, and they will contribute to your market both in terms of production and consumption. What's more important than any of that, though, is that their pops could migrate into your country. If you remember the migration bug from patch 1.7.0, then you know that the freedom of movement principle is super powerful. It is indeed very powerful, but it was patched to work how it's intended to. That sounds like it would make it weak, but I got the state of sleazy at almost 50 million pops in this run, which I'll show later, and that's because freedom of movement is now working as intended, but is still immensely powerful. Speaking of obtaining pops, we're going Victoria 2 style now, as we're going to straight up conquer China. I declared a play in June to take Suzhou, and thanks to my colonial offices and my tech, the infamy for taking land in China directly is incredibly low despite the high population there. I even went over my soft 25 infamy limits to take Shaanxi and Beijing. China's full of pops that we can put to work, and with how migration works now 1.7, if we can get onto no migration controls, we have a chance of a Han migration over to Europe. Unfortunately, the creation of cultural communities is just RNG in this game, so we have no way to make one spawn. Regardless, we can always build a couple universities in China to get qualifications and then just hire there, but we'll want to integrate the state to make that worthwhile, which takes a while. The best way to get migration is to create opportunity, and opportunity comes from jobs and arable land. In Silesia, I only have about 150,000 peasants to employ, but Silesia is an amazing state to build in because it has local access to coal, iron, wood, lead, and sulfur in large quantities. Remember that market access price impact, or MAPI, doesn't affect prices for goods produced locally. If I want to make a steel industry, it should definitely be in Silesia. I'm going to queue up all the mines there, which likely will not be able to fully employ for a very long time, but the presence of jobs and high standards of living from everyone being employed will encourage people to migrate there. I swapped out to Freedom of Movement 3 after queuing it all up, and now we can watch the pops roll in. We can see almost immediately here in Westphalia that we've got a 10% Italian minority, which likely came from Venice and Lombardy, but we also see Norwegians who were fleeing from Norway. After the war with Qing, I got a mass migration from El Salvador to Bohemia, and this will be the first of many. I got lucky this run in that America is very weak. Normally America is the nation seeing all the mass migrations, but with their weakness and lack of standard of living, people will instead flock to the Holy Roman Empire. I still have migration controls on, so I put the industrialists in government to try and get rid of them, but it's surprisingly hard to get your borders opened up. Most interest groups do not want open borders, and it's actually one of the laws that can massively increase your power. Sweden went for a unification of Scandinavia in 1879, which is fine because they're in my power block, and honestly, it's probably for the best since it'll be easier to keep track of them if they're just one country. By this point, I had a pretty well-established empire with over 300 million GDP, and in my mind, the run was more or less complete. That doesn't mean the video is done, but in terms of becoming the greatest power in the game and being totally untouchable, we've reached that now. It would be entirely acceptable to just go max infamy at this point and conquer the world if you wanted to, but that's not very fun to me. Instead, we're going to aim for the stars. Given our strategy of stealing pops away from members of our power block using freedom of movement, we are interested in dismantling great powers to add the breakaway states to our power block, and this is exactly what I have planned for Russia. In 1882, I attacked Russia to liberate Poland, Ukraine, and the Ottomans, with the intention of getting investment rights in them and then putting them in our customs union. It would also be reasonable to try and make them protectorates in the future once they have some kind of revolution, but there was no guarantee that would happen, whereas I could pretty reliably use my immense industrial might to just dominate anyone on the map as long as they weren't bankrupt. Remember that if a nation goes bankrupt, your ability to build in them is also affected by that, which I think really should be changed, but there are differing opinions on the matter. Against Russia, I had no trouble at all with my massive army, and my subject of Scandinavia even attacked from Finland to give me an easy avenue to St. Petersburg. The war ended in 1883 with me taking all of my war goals except reparations because I wanted to end the war faster, and now I've got a nice Poland and Ukraine as buffer states against Russia. I'll be forming as many pacts as possible with them to get leverage and welcoming them to my market soon. My next war was with Britain the following year as I intervened to take Senegal from them, which I really didn't need to, but Senegal does have some nice resources that I'd rather Britain not have. I realized during that war as well that I was already pretty close to getting enough leverage on the Ottomans to bring them into my block, and having the Ottomans would be awesome just because of how many pops I could potentially steal from them, alongside the fact that they have a lot of oil-rich land, which later in the game would be very important. That war was over pretty fast, as I just occupied Senegal and then waited until Britain capitulated while working on my leverage for the Ottomans. Over in Shaanxi, I've built up all the mines, but I'm finding employment difficult because of the lack of qualifications. We could hope for some skilled labor immigration eventually, but that might take a long time. So instead, I'm just going to turn Shaanxi into a haven of economic and educational prosperity by adding some universities there. I got Poland into my block a few months later, after which I cancelled all my pacts with them since I no longer need the leverage. I was going to try and bring the two Sicilies into my block, but they ended up making their own power block, surprisingly, so they're no longer leverageable. From here, most of my wars were just putting down native uprisings in Africa. I could have made colonial nations down in Africa, but I wanted to wait until I finished colonizing there to do so since my colonization is very quick. I had wanted to steal pops from Poland, but they actually had serfdom, which was problematic because it meant peasants couldn't migrate. I can't do anything about it, but that is something to keep in mind when trying to steal pops. With serfdom, peasants can't leave the subsistence farms and can't migrate, and with tenant farmers, peasants can't migrate, but they can get jobs and then migrate. Check out America here, by the way. Michigan is free in 1887. I think this is the first time I've seen them in a game before. I knew they existed, but I've never witnessed a Michigan in the wild before. Hilariously enough for me, the Ottomans had a huge civil war that I could have very easily made a subject with a reverse sway, so all that work to build leverage on the Ottomans was mostly a waste, but it's okay. I can't sway the revolt to become my subject because I'm considered an Ottoman ally due to our defensive pact. I was already in a war with France to control Korea, who had become my subject in return for support, but honestly I was feeling kind of lazy and really didn't need Korea. Although looking back, Korea has a lot of pops who could potentially migrate to my country, but it's no big deal. I ended up just capitulating to France later. A much bigger ticket item though was Japan, who I did fight to keep since Japan has a huge pop count and some very nice goods in agriculture. In 1888, I had a political movement for Council Republic, and I was thinking about going communist to try and inflate my standard of living, but I was also thinking about how laissez-faire would be best for growing my GDP to the highest possible number. Although cooperative ownership is nice because it makes your standard of living shoot so high up, the workers just don't invest as much money into growing the economy as capitalists. It is still the case that laissez-faire produces the most GDP per pound invested, which over a longer time will create more goods and therefore more standard of living in most cases, but the communist approach will very quickly skyrocket the standard of living, so I guess it depends on the short-term versus long-term mindset. It's 1888, so we're just over halfway through the game, so I'm still thinking long-term, but it's important to note that I have played for 6 hours by this time, and getting through the latter half of the game is significantly slower because of performance, particularly for massive migration and GDP nations. The more construction you make, the slower the game gets because of all the calculation. The same goes for high migration and high trade. I say all this because I was thinking long-term by staying capitalist a bit longer, but I really should have thought short-term, considering that I really didn't want to play beyond 1915 or so. I hit 500 million GDP in 1890 and have expanded the Zollverein to encompass much of Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and even parts of China. I was even working on bringing the Confederate States of America into my bloc, but that'll take a bit of time. I had enough leverage, but they had refused my offer to join a while ago, so I needed a couple years to be able to ask again. The Zollverein has created a truly unified market across the world, and I've got plenty of convoys to keep it all going. Now I just need to spike my standard of living and watch the pops flood in. I did manage to remove migration controls a few years back, meaning now anyone can move anywhere in the country. I always loved demographic shifting in Victoria 3, but it can be brutally hard to change the majority of a state, except in very low population states. Nonetheless, I'll try. So by this point in the run, I can get creative and do whatever I want. I declared a protectorate war on the Paris Commune because it'll put us at war with very little infamy, and if that commune ends up fighting with France, there's potential that I can make them a protectorate, assuming they don't take enough states in the French war to become a major power. It's pretty unlikely, but it could happen, so it's worth trying. I can't get to the commune for now, although I could violate France's sovereignty, but I didn't think of that at the time, and also, I was kind of lazy and didn't want to fight a big war against France. I did quite a few more wars for little countries like the Netherlands, and against native uprisings in Africa, but I won't cover all those because they're pretty boring. To be clear, if I weren't intentionally playing with a soft cap my infamy, I could definitely just become a monster and destroy the whole world with no one being able to stop. In 1892, the Commune finally kicked off their war with France proper, but they took enough states to become a major power, so my war goal was removed. Nonetheless, I invaded them to prevent them from taking a war goal on me, and to cause devastation to harm their country. This is not just to spite them. More devastation reduces migration attraction, which will encourage mass migrations from France to other nations, and it's very likely they'll come to Germany given how attractive our country is. It is a very real strategy to put your commanders onto the pillage order to burn the enemy's country down to encourage mass migrations, but it's not usually necessary since the AI will often run their own country into the ground all on their own. In terms of what I'm building, it's nothing too complicated. I just go to any state with a lot of peasants or unemployment and I build whatever industries are profitable. Later on, I'm going to use my power of subsidies to force huge industries into creating huge wages, but for now, I'm still on laissez-faire, so we're letting the market handle itself. If you look at the budget here, as I add some construction taxes in 1895, we can actually see that our investment pool is transferring in over £1 million to cover our construction costs, and this is the power of laissez-faire, because as much as 75% of our construction is covered by the private sector. We can grow our GDP hugely without needing to spend much money. Investment is nice because it's probably the most effective kind of taxation you can get, as oftentimes extracting wealth from the upper strata can be hard without progressive taxation laws. When the capitalists put their money into the investment pool, it'll just sit there until you spend it, so it is pretty important to make enough construction to allow the investment pool to be used. This is easier with laissez-faire since a larger portion of construction is forced into capitalist hands. Taking a look at some particular states, I've managed to Germanize East Galicia, which I'm sure couldn't possibly have any consequence in the long-term future one day. West Galicia is still Polish by plurality, but not for long. Interestingly enough, West Galicia has more South Germans, whereas East Galicia has North Germans. Even Posen, which is Prussia's normally largest share of Poles, has been Germanized, and especially Silesia, which is now dominantly German. Notice how much population we've got in all these states, by the way. This is the power of migration. If we look at the cultural communities, we see people from all over the world who are traveling to these states to live a better life. We also see over 1 million Filipinos in Anhalt who arrived here because I made Spain a subject, which put the Philippines into my market and power block. Why have they explicitly chosen Anhalt? That's because cultural community generation is just RNG, so for whatever reason, Anhalt must have been an attractive spot at one point and the Filipinos moved in. In real Germany, the Turks have a pretty large population in East Germany, especially around Berlin, but in this world the Turks have moved into the Rhine and even Alsace-Lorraine. Truly, the way to resolve the Alsace-Lorraine dispute between France and Germany is to simply Turkify it, so that kebabs and donairs can unite them all. In 1895, by the way, I got Karl Marx into my country, and of course that means I have to go communist, but it's actually a mistake to do so right now. In general, communism is good for a country which intends to slow down its industrial growth, because once you get off laissez-faire, you have to foot the bill for all the construction sectors that previously your private sector was handling. That means you either downsize or raise taxes, both of which kind of suck. Anyway, I had revolution on my mind, but I chose to put my effort into taking even more Chinese states in 1896, because the more pops I've got, the larger in theory my economy can get. We can see the power of high population Asian states overseas through Pomerania here in 1897. Almost a quarter of Pomerania is Japanese, and although it sucks to be dependent on the RNG spawning of a cultural community, when it does spawn, you can suddenly gain a ton of pops. One Han cultural community in a state like Silesia, which is an extremely good state, would be super powerful. That being said, it's also quite valid to just build up states like Shaanxi, since it also has a ton of local resources. Anyway, while fighting Italy to take the rest of North Italy for nice borders, I got a political movement for Council Republic and then it went revolutionary, so I abdicated. Of course, despite now being a Council Republic, I'm still on laissez-faire, and my chairman is an industrialist. Eradicating capitalism will take a bit more work, but we're certainly on the way there now. Unfortunately, without the authority of a monarchy, I did have to take off a bunch of consumption taxes, and that means my budget will suffer. I did start working towards cooperative ownership right away just because it feels like it's what's right, but honestly, this was a mistake. You'll see after I do this that although my construction will continue to grow and my economy will get bigger and bigger still, it will be growing less than it could have if I had stayed with capitalism. But at least a powerful trade union IG lets me get better tax laws more easily, so it's a bit of a toss-up. By being able to tax the upper strata more effectively, we can get out of them a similar benefit to if we were just taking their investment pool contributions, but doing it through taxes isn't as efficient as doing it through the investment pool. In laissez-faire, capitalist contribution efficiency is increased so that effectively, money is created out of thin air. At a baseline, efficiency is 100%, which means that 100% of the money put into the investment pool is translated into usable money. With laissez-faire, you get an additional 25%. So whatever the capitalist invests, add 25% on top of it, and that's how much you actually get. Money from thin air is nice. On cooperative ownership, we first have to deal with only 35% of our construction being available for private usage, but there's a much more insidious problem with cooperative ownership. Financial districts employ capitalists and shopkeepers by default, and only capitalists if you use the publicly traded ownership method. Manor houses employ aristocrats and farmers, which is fine and all, but you know what pops don't tend to have money on cooperative ownership? Well, the capitalists and aristocrats. After all, they can't exploit the labor when the labor owns itself. Because of forced collectivization, pops pretty much don't build anything privately anymore because it'll just get repossessed right away, although some still gets built, and I'll show you the problem this presents once we actually get cooperative ownership. Also, we suddenly go from 0.5% interest to 3.3% after getting off laissez-faire. By having 0.5% interest, I was basically able to completely ignore credit in general, but now with 3.3, it does exist, albeit it's still pretty negligible. Immediately my game lagged out as every industry was suddenly collectivized in 1899, and we see the government budget has dropped immensely. This is not just because of interest, and we can tell because the budget is white. When it's white, it means that you're only in a deficit because you're doing construction. Suddenly, the cost of construction is being almost entirely shouldered by the state, and it gets worse from here. Now, in order to offset the new budgetary demands, I have to raise taxes or reduce construction. I don't want to stop my growth because otherwise I won't hit immense GDP numbers, and my graph's curve will flatten, which is not very satisfying, so I'm going to raise taxes, which sucks because that will depress my economy. Taxes rip money out of the economy and therefore are not good to have in general. As a funny meme, by the way, and because I want to demonstrate an interesting interaction that happened to pan out here, I resigned again to become a regular republic while still keeping cooperative ownership. More interestingly, the group that I abdicated to were positivists, so we changed to state atheism. But because it wasn't passed by normal means, my state religion is still Protestant. That means I get all the benefits of state atheism in terms of conversion speed and authority, but I don't have to wait around for my nation to become atheist. Anyway, I set up my African colonies at this point since I had no more colonizing to do, and I started with Pan-European East Africa. The nice thing about these colonies is that they instantly make their states integrated, so they can rule much more effectively than I could have, and it also won't tank my average SOL to all the colonials. But funnily enough, and I actually don't know why this happened, my colonies ended up having huge standards of living despite me making them use the Crack the Whip administration. Just look, I've been demoted to number 3 by standard of living because Pan-European East Africa and Pan-European Congo have outpaced me somehow. I guess the extra throughput on everything there is making their businesses very profitable, and they get cooperative ownership because I had it when I made them. So I guess the Africans are prospering, but then I looked at demographics and saw that some parts of my colonies are majority Asian, like Zambia, which is 67% Korean, and Kenya, which is mostly Japanese. Africans cannot catch a break, man. Also, Pan-European South Africa supports Italian unification. You can't make this up, my dude. To fix my budgetary woes, I did begin passing graduated taxation, which is important because it'll let us charge dividend taxes on our laborers. One thing that is an immense benefit of our richer laborers is that now they want a ton more goods. I'm going to casually plop down almost 250 textile mills in Silesia, and this is actually going to make Silesia our most populous state by quite a bit in the future. By making a ton of jobs for our pops, they will flock to that state. In 1903, I hit my first billion GDP, which I was quite proud of, and my SOL was almost at 20, but getting a super high SOL isn't that hard with cooperative ownership. My budget is continuing to drain though, and seemingly without recourse, as in 1904, I realized the problem. Because only 35% of my construction can go to the private sector, we see that my investment pool is just ripping money out of the economy without anything to use it on. I've got $500 million in the investment pool and almost $500,000 added to it every week. This is actually worse than raising taxes because this is just money that will never be used. I guess you could consider this to be the equivalent of money hoarding, as the capitalists, shopkeepers, farmers, and aristocrats who work in the manor house and financial districts are generating immense surplus wealth, but simply can't use it for anything or aren't willing to. Oh, and if you're wondering about all that bureaucracy, it's because I'm building up my institutions, but I did overbuild it. I later downsized my bureaucracy. One thing to keep in mind about migration builds is that your bureaucracy will drain slowly as new pops enter your incorporated states, contributing to the bureaucracy costs for institutions for them. So overbuilding bureaucracy could be seen as future-proofing, but that's of course a cope. I collectivized my agriculture in 1907, and yeah, from here, the game is starting to crawl in pace. I still only have about 3,000 construction, but I want more. I'm going to push the game to its limit, which would end up killing both the run and my PC. You'll see how. Obviously, if I want to get to 10,000 construction points, I could just drop the sectors down and bankrupt myself later to make it work. But I want to try and make a sustainable construction industry. Graduated taxation helps a lot with that since our budget is the primary concern, but quite frankly, we could have gotten graduated taxation without necessarily collectivizing. Because we collectivized, we can't rely on the investment pool, and without the investment pool, this will be much harder. In 1910, I began the first construction expansion on my path to 10K. I was at 1.3 billion GDP, and my budget was stabilizing, but I was having my doubts about the possibility this would be sustainable. I stopped expanding at 8,000 construction, but I mean, just look at this. I'm spending over £3 million as of June 1911 on construction, of which only 100K is being covered privately. There was just not nearly enough money to go further beyond sustainably, but I will not be stopped. I started a second wave of construction sectors and got my construction to 10,000, but now losing £3 million a week. I need to make this sustainable. A temporary solution is to just raise taxes, but you're now going to see in real time why raising taxes can cause a death spiral. When I raise taxes, my pops begin losing standard of living. Because of that, they consume fewer goods, resulting in less profit from my industries. With less profit come fewer dividends. With fewer dividends comes less tax income. To account for that loss in dividend tax, I need to raise taxes, and the cycle continues until I can't raise taxes anymore. In 1913, I put taxes to the max to sustain my immense construction industry, and watched my income falls quickly after despite the immediate jump from raising the taxes. I'm already back into the negative just a few months later, but this actually is sustainable since my credit limit already outgrows $500,000 deficit at this point, but the effects of my higher taxes will only get worse over time. I was actually considering ending the run at this point as I had demonstrated everything I wanted to in this run, so I did a quick rundown of my best states. I've got 26 million pops in Silesia, with 30,000 more coming in each week. This is much less than a 1.7.0, but to be clear, 30,000 a week is still a huge amount of migration. The largest Silesian minorities are Poles and Yanks, funnily enough, as I guess the Americans had a ton of turmoil from all their civil wars and lack of prosperity. It's always funny to see Americans coming back to Europe. In Posen, we see Romanians, French, and Yanks as well, while in Bohemia we see a Czech plurality which is beaten out by the combined North and South German populations, which I guess we'll just call the Sudetenland. West Galicia is still mostly German and has almost 16 million pops with 29k coming each week. Remember those Filipinos in Anhalt, by the way? They are now a huge majority there, and I really don't know why, but I guess it just works. Pomerania has a huge Japanese minority, which when combined with the Filipinos there is about as large as the German population, while the Turkish minority of the Rhine continues to grow. The Japanese community in the Rhineland proper looks like it's almost bigger than the Germans, but the North and South Germans combined are much higher than Japanese. We do almost have a Turkish plurality in Alsace-Lorraine though. It's very close, and I think it would be hilarious. Oh, and remember the Han cultural communities I've been hoping for this run? Well, they appeared in the French Low Countries, and had I been building there, I bet we'd see even more immigration from China there. With no government building there whatsoever, just off of the private sector and arable land, we've got over 1 million Han pops there. The same goes for Baden, albeit only 500,000 Han pops. To help visualize the immense effect I've had on my power block with all the migration, check out the Ottoman population graph. Where do you think those Turks went, eh? We can see an even harsher effect on Scandinavia, as their population has almost dropped to where it was when they were just Sweden. The random drops are from revolutions, by the way. Even Ukraine has been drained slightly, albeit not as much as I'd have thought. It's probably because they have a lot of arable land. If you want to drive more migration, try investing in all the arable land in a foreign power and watch their pops leave as they all become unemployed. This might cause turmoil, which means putting down rebellions, but maybe that's a good thing so you can get them as a protectorate anyway. Looking at my market, the most produced good by raw numbers is actually coal, which does check out since coal is used to basically everything. I then saved the game and quit, telling my Discord community I was done, but then the next day, I had an idea I wanted to test out. Despite the nerf to freedom of movement, can we still get a 50 million pop state like in 1.7.0 anyway? Let's try the old subsidy strat from old patches and see if it still works. I did a speedrun a long time ago to get Amish Paradise as fast as possible by using a strange interaction with subsidies and wages. When you subsidize a building, it will force workers into it and then pay them out from either the profits of the building or the government treasury. The wage will be whatever the normal wage of your country is. Normal wage is basically just the average wage across all your incorporated states. The thing is that when you subsidize a building, it hands jobs to pops who otherwise might not get any, and creates a bunch of goods which cheapens them. This in turn raises standard of living, and standard of living is the number which determines wages in a state. You can essentially turn on subsidies in every industry in a particular state and watch the SOL shoot up, which raises the wages. In the Amish Paradise run, we exploited this to encourage wage competition by making the non-subsidized industries that are competing with the subsidized ones raise wages to compete, even though a subsidized building will always take workers even if there's less profitability there. You can essentially swap back and forth between subsidizing and not subsidizing to artificially raise wages. Check out the Amish Paradise speedrun in the description to see more details on that, but for the purpose of this run, I'm going to be just putting on subsidies in Silesia, but not micromanaging it to force wages up. In order to do this without bankrupting though, I'd have to either reinstitute laissez-faire, which is not going to happen anytime soon, or I'd have to downsize construction. Yes, the 10k construction points were unsustainable for the long term, but dropped it to a mere 8k and went from there. By 1916, I had 30 million pops in Silesia with almost 40,000 coming each week. Once I had removed enough debt, I wanted to see if I could supercharge my economy with a temporary tax break. I minimized taxes in 1917, and yes, I'm skipping a ton of years just because not much is really happening as it has built up Silesia a ton. I did start up an electricity sector, so I can use the better production methods to even further drive wages up. Remember that better production methods employ higher qualification jobs, which in turn pay higher wages. In 1918, I reached 1.7 billion GDP thanks to the tax cut, and the deficit went from the initial £6 million when I first lowered taxes to just £4 million, which means I'm still screwed, but damn, £2 million additional pounds for the budget because the lower taxes caused increased consumption and dividends for my treasury. I actually chose in 1918 to swap back to consumption-only taxes because I was planning on killing the run soon, so how about we just abolish all taxes and see how high the standard of living and GDP can get if we just don't tax dividends or anything. After passing consumption taxes, I added 23 standard of living across my 356 million pop nation, which is insane, and 1.7 billion GDP, but from here, it all collapsed. I was going to bankrupt very soon, so I tried to keep it afloat with a ton of consumption taxes in 1919, but again, all these taxes will only temporarily fix our budget, as once the consumption of our pops goes down, we'll see our taxes decrease because the pops won't be consuming as much. Before that could happen, I fully sent it and removed all taxes, dropping myself to an 11 million pound deficit, before then putting the taxes back on because not only was I gaining debt, my credit limit was shrinking as industries downsized due to lacking profits. After putting the taxes back on again, my GDP shrunk to 1.5 billion by August, and my SOL dropped to 21.5 by 1920. For the first time in a long time, I actually had radicals, as my nation was experiencing immense waves of economic deflation from all the taxes. I then took the taxes down a bit, which put me back to 1.7 billion GDP and 22.3 SOL in 1921. But you can see this infinite loop of shrinking and growing economy. I had even shrunk my construction back to 3k points, but by this point, the construction would almost entirely have to go, and I'd have to raise taxes to stabilize my budget, after which I could resume construction slowly but surely as the shock of the tax changes settled down, but the point, again, of this section is to explain how taxes are really bad. Here's Silesia in 1922, despite all the economic instability by the way. We've got 45 million pops with 50k coming each week. One idea I had to help the economy was to pass multiculturalism because then it would end discrimination, which might counteract the economic shrinkage by increasing wages for all my discriminated pops, who in turn would buy more goods and increase profits. Unfortunately though, in 1923, I started defaulting and I was done by now. Each year was taking me about 30 to 45 minutes to pass and I was done with this run. This has been Super Germany, and it was my pleasure to put together this guide for you. I took a look around my states again to see some of our best accomplishments and found Shaanxi with its Japanese minority pretty cool. Silesia, by this point, is starting to see emigration as we need to keep building there to make more jobs, but I'm defaulting so I can't build anymore. Check out Bohemia here with 31 million pops, putting Chinese states to shame. We do see in the culture map mode, by the way, that Alsace-Lorraine is indeed Turkified. Strasbourg is now officially Kreuzberg. We've used our state atheism, Protestantism to convert almost all the Catholics of the former Austrian Empire, but we do still have a lot of Catholics around. It takes a long time to convert so many tens of millions of pops. In terms of the most prosperous states worldwide, turns out Finland somehow got me beat, so I guess I'm literally a trash player, and behind them are all my states like Slovakia, Transylvania, Ruhr, and so on, until we get down to Missouri, which is in the Confederate States. The reason the Confederates are so prosperous is mostly because they're mooching off my market. Anyway, that's the video. Sort of an unceremonious ending, but hey, migration meta is still on the table for sure, and I think Super Germany has never been easier to do than now. I hope you learned a bit about how Victoria 3 works in this video, and I encourage you to like and subscribe so you can see more high-level Victoria 3 content in the future. Thank you for your time.